Breaking news. Things are heating up behind the scenes in Denver, and we need to talk about something very important because the final decisions are getting closer. We all know how much every roster spot matters when a team believes it can compete for something big. And man, I really want to see the Denver Broncos back in the Super Bowl. Why not this year? Some fans believe Sean Payton already knows exactly which players deserve those final spots, while others think Friday night against the Minnesota Vikings could still change everything. I want to know which side you are on. Do you trust the decisions Payton is making right now, especially after the surprising Taylor Rapp move? Or do you think Denver could end up regretting one of these cuts? Write your opinion below. And if you have been a Denver Broncos fan for more than 15 years, hit that like button hard. Alright, let's talk about what is happening with this Broncos roster. Now let's get right into it, because Friday night against the Minnesota Vikings is suddenly going to look very different from what some Broncos fans probably expected. Sean Payton confirmed that Bo Nix will not play in the preseason finale, and while that definitely takes away some of the excitement from the game, it also creates one of the most interesting situations of the entire preseason. Without Nix on the field, the focus at quarterback moves directly towards Sam Ehlinger and Jarrett Stidham. This is their opportunity. This is the kind of game where every possession matters, because there are not many chances left to convince the coaching staff before the roster gets reduced to 53 players. And quarterback will not be the only position affected. Payton indicated that around 40 players may not play Friday night. Think about that for a second. That is a huge number of players being held out of the final preseason game. It means Broncos fans probably should not expect to see many established starters on the field. That could include players like J.K. Dobbins, and with Bo Nix sitting out, it would also make sense if Denver does not put players like Jalen Waddle or Courtland Sutton into unnecessary preseason action. Marvin Mims Jr. is a more interesting situation because he has been a full participant in practice and has apparently looked fantastic. But overall, the message seems pretty clear. This game is going to belong mainly to the players fighting for jobs, and that makes Friday extremely important. Maybe the football itself becomes a little less exciting without many of the starters, but the individual battles become much more meaningful because the final roster decisions are coming immediately afterward. And that brings us directly to one of the strangest developments of the week. The Taylor Rapp era in Denver may already be over, at least for now. Just days after the Broncos added the veteran safety, Denver released him. It was surprising because there had been plenty of excitement about what Rapp could potentially bring to this defense. This is a player who had previously played for Sean McVay with the Los Angeles Rams and had won a Super Bowl. He later played for the Buffalo Bills, and there was some optimism that he was moving beyond the leg injury that affected him last season. Even more importantly, Sean Payton and Vance Joseph had both praised him. They talked about how smart he was. They talked about how quickly he was learning the playbook. He looked like exactly the kind of experienced veteran who could walk into a defensive room late in the summer and immediately understand what was happening. That is why the release seemed so confusing at first. But Payton gave us an important detail afterward. According to him, Rapp is dealing with a personal situation. Payton also made it clear that Rapp enjoyed being in Denver, and there appears to be a real possibility that the Broncos could eventually bring him back on the practice squad. That changes the way we should look at this move. This does not necessarily sound like Denver suddenly decided that Taylor Rapp cannot play football. It sounds more complicated than that, and if he does eventually return to the practice squad, Denver could potentially have an experienced veteran available to activate if the team needs help during the season. The strange part is that Broncos fans barely even had an opportunity to see him. Rapp participated in only one Broncos practice, and even during that practice, there was no real hitting involved. His stay was so short that we never really got the opportunity to see how he could fit into Vance Joseph's defense. But while Rapp's departure creates uncertainty for him, it could create a major opportunity for J.L. Skinner. And I think this might quietly be one of the biggest stories coming out of this move. Skinner has already shown Denver something very valuable over the last couple of seasons. He can make an impact on special teams. Sean Payton has talked before about how important that is for younger players. Before you earn a bigger role on offense or defense, you often need to prove that you can help the football team somewhere else. Special teams can be the doorway. And Skinner has absolutely shown that physical mentality. We are talking about a safety listed around 6'4" and 220 pounds who brings real force when he hits someone. He has the type of size and physicality you notice immediately, especially when he is coming downhill against the run. Broncos fans have already watched him contribute on special teams. We have seen the energy. We have seen the hard hits. We have seen him involved as a gunner. We have seen him make plays around kicks. That matters because Denver does not have to imagine whether Skinner can handle an NFL field. They have already watched him contribute in an important phase of the game.
There is also a famous Broncos example showing why special teams can matter so much. Terrell Davis once made his presence known during the preseason by flying down the field and delivering a tackle on kickoff coverage. That moment helped get the attention of Mike Shanahan and became part of the story of Davis earning his place. Now, nobody is saying J.L. Skinner is suddenly going to become Terrell Davis. That is not the point. The point is that special teams can create opportunities. And Skinner has been creating those opportunities. We have even seen him get defensive snaps before. After P.J. Locke was injured last season, there were situations where Skinner appeared with the starting defense in certain packages. So Denver already knows some of what he can offer. His college production also showed the same physical style. He finished the season at Boise State with 92 tackles, and that aggressive football personality has followed him into the NFL. Taylor Rapp leaving the roster, at least temporarily, now creates a clearer path for Skinner to push toward that third safety role. And it is not only Skinner. This also creates another opportunity for Devin Key. That is what makes roster moves at this point of the preseason so fascinating. One player leaving does not just affect one player. It can change the entire path of another position battle. Denver also made another move by waiving Kyer Duplessis, and the Broncos responded by bringing in defensive tackle Israel Antwine. Antwine is a very large defensive lineman who played college football at Colorado and Oklahoma State and has spent time moving around professional football, including the UFL. And Denver adding him right now probably needs to be viewed through the situation surrounding this final preseason game. With Sean Payton suggesting that around 40 players may not participate Friday, Denver needs bodies who can actually take meaningful snaps against Minnesota. Antwine now gets that opportunity. It is difficult to look at the situation and immediately see a clear path for him to suddenly become a starter on this defensive line. The Broncos are trying to figure out how this defensive front looks after JFM, and Antwine is arriving extremely late in the process. But that does not mean Friday is meaningless for him. Quite the opposite. He may get a lot of work. And sometimes that is all a player needs. You get one game, you get a few drives, and you show the coaching staff whether you belong around this team. Antwine showed during his college career that he could handle double teams and create problems in the middle, and now he gets an extremely short window to show Denver what he can do. The Broncos have now added a player from the UFL on back-to-back days, which tells you something about how aggressively the front office is still searching for useful depth before the final roster decisions. And Denver was not finished. The Broncos also added veteran offensive